Once upon a time, in 1867, an old man was walking along the north side of Broad Street going east, only a couple of blocks from where we are assembled now. He was a very frail, sick, weary old man, 73 years of age, but for all his ailments that he was racked with, he could have been 93. He had lung problems. Every movement was an effort. He was subject sometimes to uncontrollable fits of coughing and had agonizing back pain that kept him awake most of the night. But the state of his health was not the foremost problem on his mind at that time as he walked on that humid, sweltering July day with the perspiration dripping from his body as he made his way slowly past the sandstone walls of monumental Episcopal Church. This old man, Reverend Dr. Nathaniel Culver, was dwelling on what had transpired during the past 2 years. You see, once upon an earlier time, in April 1865, the men and women of the American Baptist Home Mission Society realized that it was not enough for 4 million slaves to have freedom. Freedom in and of itself was not enough. They also needed the education, the skills, the knowledge, even the basic literacy to really benefit from that freedom. Otherwise, that freedom would count for very little. Therefore, into the breach, into southern cities like the newly liberated Richmond, the society sent teachers and missionaries to establish schools. In Richmond, they founded a school, Richmond Theological School for Freedom. But it hovered constantly on the edge of extinction. Consistency, organization was lacking. There was a lack of accommodation for classes in the city where 30 city blocks had been destroyed by the evacuation fire, which had been set by the retreating Confederate Army and which the wind had caused to spiral out of control. There was hostility and intimidation. Classes were held haphazardly at various locations. There was no campus. All was at a standstill. It seemed hopeless. But now enter Dr. Culver from Orwell, Vermont, via Chicago. Dr. Culver was an old line abolitionist. He'd been fighting slavery all his life. He was a born fighter. He'd been threatened with lynching. He'd been intimidated. He'd been beaten. But he had endured. Now, he knew that he did not have much longer to live, and that this might be his last important project of his life. But he was fearless. Death had no horror for him. He was not going to be afraid of no group of stinking, sneaking hooligans lurking around in bed sheets was going to faze him. But the problem of lack of accommodations was not to be that easily solved. No amount of courage seemed to be able to overcome that. He looked, he asked, he begged, he pleaded, only to be rebuffed and insulted time and time again. People would spit on the ground as he passed by, call him names. Now time was running out, that July day. He was sinking into despondency and constantly praying to God for some miracle. This aged man, so fragile of health, painfully walked the 25 feet from Monumental Church to the corner of College and Broad Streets, where outside the First African Baptist Church, he saw some of the congregation gathered. Many former slaves among them, and he knew them. And when he saw them, he broke down. He couldn't take it anymore. He poured out his heart to them. He told them of his despairs. He apologized for letting them down. he asked for their prayers. He was about ready to give up. Then, in the crowd, as she's described, a large, fair-faced woman spoke up. And what she said was, "Dr. Culver, I have a property that I think you could use for your school." She was a former slave named Mary Lumpkin. Now, the question was, her property, it had a history. It had a notorious history. She was the widow of the vile, vicious slave dealer, Robert Lumpkin. And Lumpkin's large slave trading complex, on which we are sitting and standing, well, it included a slave jail, tavern, kitchen, hotel and residence, auction block. It had been the scene of so much torture, so much suffering, it had been dubbed the Devil's Half-Acre.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. What a beautiful day. It is great to be with you. On behalf of the First Lady and myself, we want to be here today to celebrate this 150th anniversary of Virginia Union University. I am honored to be with you today. When you think about what we're doing here today, is the birth of our nation, the end of the Civil War, which we have all just spent the last week recognizing here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Just a couple days ago, Dr. Perkins and I were on the steps of the Capitol for the commemoration ceremony of the day that Abraham Lincoln arrived by rowboat with his son Tad and walked through the Capitol grounds right where we stood. And he went in front of the statue of George Washington and addressed all the freed slaves. I mean, that is history. You can't find this anywhere else in the United States of America. We are the greatest state of all 50 states in America. Virginia, as we all know. But today is something special. And on that day, when all the slaves were free, and all walked around Abraham Lincoln as he walked down Governor Street, there was a piece of history too. Lumpkin's jail. And the widow of Mr. Lumpkin, as you know, was a slave herself, and donated this land to a preacher who then ultimately used it for educational purposes, which became Virginia Union University. I mean, folks, that is such a historic day, and I am so honored to be here 150 years later. I'm not sure that I'll be around in 150 years from today, but I'm going to give it all I got. I promise you that. But you think of the great alumni who have made Virginia what it is today. Of course, our great former governor, Doug Wilder, the first African-American governor elected. And I know as I look out this room, and a lot more governors are going to be here, right, young folks? You all going to be governors someday? I'm counting. One guy in the back saying, "No way." Some days I don't blame you, but whatever, you know. But there were so many others, including Henry Marsh and Benjamin Lambert and Spotswood Robinson. You think of Ford Tucker Johnson, a chemistry major from Lawrenceville, who was among the 34 students who led the sit-in and Thalmeyer's lunch counter and ultimately ended all racist policies in the Richmond area. He later took another case to the United States Supreme Court and ended courtroom segregation. Another graduate, Alex Bledsoe James, a Virginia Union who became a vice president, who used his house as collateral to post bond for student protesters, and later became Virginia Union's 7th president. He had this to say at his retirement: "Let us continue to work together to make our community the ideal community by being active participants. Continue your involvement and we will become a model for the nation." He was right, folks. It is about community involvement. As governor, I do a lot of these types of ceremonies, but I always like to use a ceremony to talk about what we need to do going forward. And it's important that we recognize 150 years ago. But let us use what happened 150 years ago to inspire us going forward. We need to work hard. We need to become engaged in our communities. I think it's a disgrace in our nation today when just in last year's election, only 42% of the eligible voters actually went to the polls. You've seen voter involvement here in Richmond continually decline. When you think 150 years ago when those slaves were free, and the idea that 150 years down the road, people did not exercise their right to vote after all they had been for. So I call upon all of us to work hard, to stay involved in our communities, and ask yourself every day, what kind of Commonwealth do we want to be in 150 years? Let us all work together. Let us work hard. Let us be engaged in the political process. Let's make sure every child in Virginia has access to a pre-K education. Let's make sure that we work to bring down those health care costs and allow every one of our citizens to have access to quality health care. Every child should have access to a great education. And it's the folks here at Virginia Union University who are going to make that possible. All the young folks in the back of the room. We're going to continue to do our part. And I'm happy to announce that today, with the Secretary of Commonwealth, LeVar Stoney, today we went over 6,550 felons who had their rights restored and can now go vote in the Commonwealth. And one of the arguments that LeVar and I continually heard is, why give them their rights back? They don't vote. Well, I'm proud to say that 75% of those folks who got their rights restored, guess what they immediately did? They went down and registered to vote, folks. So let's keep it going. I thank everybody at Virginia Union University. You have shaped the history of our community, the city of Richmond, and the Commonwealth of Virginia. I thank all of you for your courage, your leadership. But folks, we're just starting. We got a long way to go. Let's build upon what happened 150 years ago, and let's get out there and fight and make sure that Virginia Union University is strong 150 years from today. Thank you very much. Honored to be with you.
Lady Mr. Perkins, and to all of you who've come, distinguished leaders, this is an important moment in the life of our institution. Later on today, I'm to give a closing dedication remarks, but let me say this morning that in the afterwake of Easter, the season of resurrection, that Virginia Union, from an anthropomorphic standpoint, or rather from a theological standpoint, is a indication of the promise of resurrection. For 400 years, our people lived in the worst slavery in the history of the world. It was a slavery worse because it divided our families, it took away our language, it dismissed our heritage. That was a slavery as dark as death. But thanks be to God, as we came to the end of the Civil War, out of the death, to be a slave, to be in a jail, to have your family sold on the rocks, to have your personal presence violated by inspection, to be handled like cattle, to be called made-up names, to be dismissed and disconnected of your future is dark death. To have your mind ignored, to have the world say that your mind does not matter, that you have no potential,
that's right,
that you can be nothing. That is worse than death. But thanks be to God, as in the resurrection, that in our darkest moment, God's intervention. Thank God for the anthropomorphic participants like the American Baptists and the hearts of those touched by abolitionists who wanted it done. But behind all of this was the majestic hand of God orchestrating the resurrection. Because you know, as Easter, only God can give a resurrection. Only God can take death from death and bring life. He does it every day. Every time a baby is born, God's fingerprint, his signature is on it. And we come here today, we would miss this moment if all we did was to celebrate the human participants and the anthropomorphic involvement. This is a God moment.
that's right.
This is a moment when we clearly see that the resurrection has implications for our lives. And it is also a message to those students who are here and who will come, that no matter how dark your situation, no matter how difficult your struggle, no matter how limited your resources, no matter how many people have dismissed you and said you did not matter,
That's right.
remember that Lumpkin's jails becomes a sign of resurrection and hope, that no matter how dark the situation, no matter how difficult the circumstance, you can become all that God has called you to become. It's resurrection morning.
Tutelage of some of the most esteemed faculty in the world, and under the fine deanship of John Kinney, the School of Theology, and I'm delighted to be sharing this day with you. For the last 24 years, I've been serving as the executive director of the Home Mission Society, and although I've led this organization for the longest of any executive in its tenure, I am not the first African American to do so. The first African American to do so was Paul Nichols, my immediate predecessor, who was also a VUU alumnus and a distinguished former dean here. And he was the one who broke that corporate American Baptist stained glass corporate ceiling. My wife and I, over 30-something years ago, drove Dr. Henry and Ella Mitchell all the way from Los Angeles, California, here to Richmond, so that he would be able to assume the deanship of the School of Theology here at Virginia Union. In honor of both Dr. Kinney, Paul Nichols, and Henry Mitchell, I'm just proud and pleased to announce that we're making a $15,000 donation to Virginia Union University. We'll be presenting that to Dr. Perkins. American Baptist Home Mission Society, together with our foreparents, stood on this sacred site, Lumpkin's Jail, or the old slave pen 150 years ago, to found what was to become Virginia Union University. Can you imagine the state of our people at that time in our history? Charles S. Johnson, the former president of Fisk University, sets the stage for us. In 1860, he says, there were 4,400,000 Negroes in the United States. Of these, just over 200,000 were in the North. The rest were in the South. The free Negroes reported by the census as able to read and write were just 151,000, or about 3% of the black population. And although few slaves could read or write, it is probable that emancipation found no more than 5% of all blacks who were literate. These conditions were further exacerbated by a newly formed Ku Klux Klan, an economy in tatters and in shambles, resentment, recrimination, and retaliation running rampant throughout the South, like kudzu seeking to choke the life out of the newly freed men and women dreaming and hoping for just a measure of formal education. But thank God that God rules and super rules. And the providence of God penetrated former slave pens and jettisoned old jail cells and transformed them into academies where our highest aspiration for ourselves and for our seed could sprout wings and take flight. I thank God for what our great grandparents were able to do, that together with the home mission societies, they had the vision and the fortitude to address the needs of people who had lived in the most deplorable and pitiable of conditions. I'm proud now to lead that organization that dedicated then 90% of its resources in the 1860s and 70s to educating the emancipated, and passed a resolution in 1862 which says that they would take immediate steps to supply with Christian instruction by means of missionaries and teachers, the emancipated slaves, and also to inaugurate a system of operation for carrying the gospel of light to bound and free throughout the whole southern section of our country, so fast and so far as the progress of our arms and the restoration of order and law shall open the way. It's important to note that here in 1865, the American Baptist Home Mission Society did not simply found a college or start a university. What they started was an institute. Latta Thomas says that they called it an institute to indicate the conviction of the founders that from modest efforts like small seeds under God's grace, divine fulfillment will triumph. Our founders, like the epistle of the Hebrews, like the author of the epistle to the Hebrews, were convinced that God had planned and could possibly see, not seeing what by finite creatures at any point in history, that this cloud of witnesses would become scholars and leaders and lifelong learners of a global society nourished by our African American and Christian heritage and energized by a commitment to excellence and diversity. Because of the seeds planted by them, we are. Would you please join me in giving God thanks for this cloud of witnesses? God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, Thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, Thou who hast by Thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path, we pray. Together we celebrate that path, a path providentially paved by Your amazing grace. It was Your grace, O God, that the property of an old slave trader, Lumpkin's jail, which had been a prison of sorrow songs, was transformed into a citadel of hope for those who search for the light of truth and for liberation. For You we say thank You. And lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met Thee, lest our hearts drunk with the wine of the world, we forget Thee, shadowed beneath Thy hand, may we forever stand true, O God, to You, true to our native land. And so we lift names like Nathaniel Glover, Jeremiah Mace, S.B. Gregory, J.M.P. King, W. Bishop Johnson, Holland Powell, Wilbert Herbert Stokes, Mary Ransom, Randella, Lucas Gayton, Eva Robert Coles. These are just a handful of the names, O God, and where there are scores of names and scores of men and women who went before us and prayed and paid and pioneered before us so that we might reach this present day. And while their names may not roll off of our tongues, nor their stories reside in the frontal vortex of our consciousness, help us to remember nonetheless that this magnificent university was not created out of nothing, but rather created out of the blood and sweat and sacrifices and resources of those who came before us. Let us not forget, O Lord. Teach us not to forget. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as a roaring sea. May we sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. May we sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on, O God, till victory is won. So we stand today, O God, with dancing in our feet and joy in our hearts. You have been good to us. You are a good God. But make us more than just happy. Make us convinced and convicted. You have called us to be all that we seem to be. Challenge us to aim to be more than what we are now. So help us to face the rising sun. Help us march until victory is won. Thank You for all those who came before us, and may all those who come behind us find us faithful. Amen.
Our Governor, we are delighted that you are here with us this morning. I also want to recognize my students who are with us this morning. This is an important day in the life of your university, and these episodic events, as today, is something that you'll never forget. I'd also like to recognize our faculty and staff that are here this morning. Would you please stand? These are the people who make miracles happen every day. We haven't forgot our mission. We clearly understand our purpose. We are a mission-driven institution where sometimes metrics do not matter. What matters to us is providing access and opportunity, just like what was done 150 years ago. By providing access and opportunity, we, Virginia Union, have produced some of America's most outstanding citizens. And I wonder what would have happened if it had not been for Virginia Union University. Every day we see, every day, even though we are a mid-sized liberal arts university, but every day we see graduates of our institution stepping up and doing important work. Just in December, one of our graduates was promoted to general in the United States Army. You know, there are only a certain number of people can do that.
That's right, brother.
But they came from Virginia Union University. We produced most of the mayors of the city of Richmond and many other people who make legislative decisions for the Commonwealth of Virginia. We are an institution that produces students that understand that they have responsibility. We are intrusive in their lives. Some of them don't like it. But that's how we roll at Virginia Union. We expect our students to be outstanding citizens. We expect them to be concerned about their environment. We expect them to be concerned about the lives of others. That's why, Governor, we received 4 presidential citations for the number of hours that our students involve volunteering in the community. Last year, they spent over 26,000 hours volunteering and serving others. We believe that that is the essence of the beginning of leadership. Once you understand the human condition, once you see what's happening in our communities, my students will be resolved once they graduate from Union to be change agents in this world. We take this very serious. We take it very serious. And we use these statements all the time. At our chapel services, in most gatherings that we have. We understand God's blessings. We understand our responsibility. And we appreciate this miracle every day.